So, we are reading For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. It is essentially the ANCAP bread book. It is a big old how-to for the ANCAP folks. What they would want to see, how they would want to see society run. And today, we are on, if I can get this, my cameraman can get this going here, Chapter 13, Conservation, Ecology, and Growth. So, this should be interesting. Let's see what the ANCAPs think about conservation, ecology, and growth. All right, without further ado, let's see how many folks we got watching. We can go ahead and get the ball rolling on this. I think I've meandered enough. All right, so let's get into it. Murray Rothbard, For a New Liberty, Chapter 13, Conservation, Ecology, and Growth. Liberal complaints. Left liberal intellectuals are often a wondrous group to behold. In the last 3 or 4 decades, not a very long time in human history, they have, like whirling dervishes, let loose a series of angry complaints against free market capitalism. The curious thing is that each of these complaints has been contradictory to one or more of their predecessors, but contradictory complaints by liberal intellectuals do not seem to faze them or serve to abate their petulance. Even though it is often the very same intellectuals who are reversing themselves so rapidly. And these reversals seem to make no dent whatever in their self-righteousness or in the self-confidence of their position. Let us consider the record of recent decades. All right, so he's going to be going through a list of liberal complaints about capitalism. So keep in mind, he keeps saying liberal here and not leftist. I suspect if you folks have seen David Harvey's RSA animate video on the collapse, and he discusses that there's all sorts of liberal explanations for why the market crash of '08 happened, and he wanted to give like a Marxist critique that would be a little more of a systemic analysis of the crash. So I think we're going to get here a liberal look at complaints of capitalism. So let's see what they're all about. Number 1. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, the liberal intellectuals came to the conclusion that capitalism was suffering from inevitable secular stagnation, a stagnation imposed by the slowing down of population growth, the end of the old Western frontier, and by the supposed fact that no further inventions were possible. All this spelled eternal stagnation, permanent mass unemployment, and therefore the need for socialism, or thoroughgoing state planning, to replace free market capitalism. This on the threshold of the greatest boom in American history. 2. During the 1950s, despite the great boom in post-war America, the liberal intellectuals kept raising their sights. The cult of economic growth now entered the scene. To be sure, capitalism was growing, but it was not growing fast enough. Therefore, free market capitalism must be abandoned, and socialism or government intervention must step in and force-feed the economy, must build investments and compel greater saving in order to maximize the rate of growth, even if we don't want to grow that fast. Conservative economists such as Colin Clark attacked this liberal program as growthmanship. Number 3. Suddenly, John Kenneth Galbraith entered the liberal scene with his best-selling The Affluent Society in 1958, and just as suddenly the liberal intellectuals reversed their indictments. The trouble with capitalism now appeared was that it had grown too much. We were no longer stagnant but too well off, and man had lost his spirituality amidst supermarkets and automobile tail fins. What was necessary then was for government to step in. either in massive intervention or as socialism, and tax the consumers heavily in order to reduce their bloated affluence. Number 4. The cult of excess. Affluence had its day, to be superseded by the contradictory worry about poverty. Stimulated by Michael Harrington's... Sorry for that siren, but I'm not going to close the fan. It's too hot in this... Close the window because it's too hot in this room. All right. Michael Harrington's The Other America in 1962. Suddenly the problem with America was not excessive affluence, but increasing and grinding poverty. And once again, the solution was for the government to step in, plan mightily, and tax the wealthy in order to lift up the poor. And so we had the war on poverty for several years. So you notice he's acting like the third one, too much affluence, and the fourth one, too much poverty. He's acting like this is a flip-flop. I mean, it's not exactly a flip-flop. It happens to be in this particular time, people are complaining about hoarding wealth, and then hoarding wealth leaves on the other side of it poverty. These are two sides of the same argument. So he's acting like it's contradictory to say, well, the problem with the economy is too many wealthy people hoarding things. The problem with the economy is so many people go without. Like, that has just existed since the time frame that he's talking about. We still live in that today. A person can make either of those arguments and be rational. It's not like they're flip-flopping. All right, 5, stagnation. Deficit growth, over-affluence, over-poverty. The intellectual fashions change like ladies' hemlines. Then, in 1964, the happily short-lived ad hoc Committee on the Triple Revolution issued its then famous manifesto, which brought us and the liberal intellectuals full circle. For 2 or 3 frenetic years, we were regaled with the idea that America's problem was not stagnation, but the exact reverse. In a few short years, all of America's production facilities would be automated and cybernated. Incomes and production would be enormous and superabundant, but everyone would be automated out of a job. Once again, free market capitalism would lead to a permanent mass unemployment, which could only be remedied, you guessed it, by massive state intervention or by outright socialism. For several years, in the mid-1960s, we thus suffered from what was justly named automation hysteria. So he's acting like this flip-flop has happened here now, and now the automation thing. But obviously automation is really big right now with the self-driving cars and everything else. But even in socialism, utopian scientific, which I think is 150 years old at this point, they talk about automation, the need for employing less people as technology improves, and yet you need to sell the goods to someone. Like, that's been a conflict of capitalism for 150 years. So I don't see why he's acting like this is a big change. Let's keep going. 6. By the late 1960s, it was clear to everyone that the automation hysterics had been dead wrong. This book was written in the 80s, by the way, so I'm pretty sure he saw jobs being automated out in the 80s, and I imagine he's lived, I don't know if this guy's alive still or not, but I mean, automating jobs has just continued to happen, so I don't see where he's getting this. But okay, they were dead wrong apparently. The automation was proceeded at no faster a pace than old-fashioned mechanization, and indeed at the 1969 recession was causing a fall off in the rate of increase of productivity. One hears no more about automation dangers. Nowadays, we are now in the 7th phase of liberal economic flip-flops. Let's look at this. So number six. By the late 1960s, it was clear that everyone, the automation hysteria was wrong. Indeed, the recession caused no one here. So this number 6 isn't even a reason. Number 3, too much affluence. Number 4, too much scarcity. Number 5, stagnation. 6 has nothing. I don't know. That was maybe a typo. 7, affluence is again excessive, and in the name of conservation, ecology, and the increasing scarcity of resources, free market capitalism is growing much too fast. State planning, or socialism, must of course step in to abolish all growth and bring about a zero-growth society and economy, in order to avoid negative growth or retrogression sometime in the future. We're now back to the super Galbraithian position, to which has been added scientific jargon about affluence, ecology, and spaceship Earth, as well as a bitter assault on technology itself as being an evil polluter. Capitalism has brought about technology growth, including population growth, industry, and pollution, and the government is supposed to step in and eradicate these evils. All right, I imagine most of us have seen Philosophy Tube's latest video, right? That was pretty good. I will soon be reviewing Post-Scarcity Anarchism by Murray Bookchin. That's coming down the pipes. All right, let's keep going. It is not at all unusual, in fact, to find the same people now holding a contradictory blend of positions 5 and 7, and maintaining at one and the same time that A, we are living in a post-scarcity age where we no longer need private property, capitalism, or material incentives to produce, and B, that capitalist greed is depleting our resources and bringing about imminent worldwide scarcity. That's not a contradictory position. That's literally like the entire argument of post-scarcity anarchism. A, we are living in a post-scarcity age where we no longer need private property, capitalism, material incentives, and production. I mean, that's been argued since the conquest of bread, that we have like all these goods, empty homes while people go homeless, stores of goods while people go without. That's not contradictory to the fact that we're over-exploiting these resources. The liberal answer to both, or indeed to all of these problems, turns out, of course, to be the same: socialism or state planning to replace free market capitalism. The great economist Joseph Schumpeter put the whole shoddy performance of liberal intellectuals into a nutshell a generation ago. Capitalism stands its trial before judges who have the sentence of death in their pockets. They're going to pass it, whatever the defense they may hear. The only victorious defense can possibly produce is a change in their indictment. And so the charges of indictments may change and contradict previous charges, but the answer is always the weary same. I don't have it in front of me, but I feel like maybe if I were to take all this list of 7 so-called liberal complaints about capitalism and put them through David Harvey's 17 Contradictions in the End of Capitalism, or David Fisher's 3 reasons why capitalist realism is destroying the world, or Zizek's 3 reasons in First Tragedy and then the Farce, where he has 3 reasons why capitalism and our ecology are heading towards collapse. I feel like these so-called contradictions and stuff are not the contradictions he's laying out. That just all of these problems have existed and continue to exist in capitalism. We have abundance while people go without. We have people living in affluence while people go without. We have the ecology being destroyed. These aren't mutually exclusive. So, okay. Are we still good on sound and everything? Everything's coming through just fine, I hope. The chat's a little bit slow because it's my laptop is not working very quickly. The stream help. Cool. Okay. The attack on technology and growth. The fashionable attack on growth and affluence is palpably an attack by comfortable, contempted upper-class liberals, enjoying a material... Sorry, let's start from the top. The fashionable attack on growth and affluence is palpably an attack on an attack by comfortable, contempted upper-class liberals, enjoying a material contentment and a living standard undreamt of by even the wildest men of the past. It is easy for upper-class liberals to sneer at materialism and to call for a freeze on all further economic advance. This kind of reminds me of the standard line that all the communists are just rich white college kids, completely ignoring that communist and left-leaning movements all over the world in, third and second world countries as well. So here, the only people making this attack on capitalism's overproduction and overconsumption is just rich people. Okay, sure thing. For the mass of the world's population still living in squalor, such a cry for the cessation of growth is truly obscene. But even in the United States, there is little evidence of satiety, and superabundance. Even the upper-class liberals themselves have not been conspicuous for making a bonfire of their salary checks as a contribution to the war on materialism and affluence. I think that we've seen this one before. Let's see that again. Even the upper-class liberals themselves have not been conspicuous for making a bonfire of their salary checks as a contribution to their war on materialism and abundance. You critique society, yet live in society. Curious. I'm very intelligent. We've all seen this one. All right. You folks aren't just living... You complain about global warming. I don't see you living in the woods and, dying of diphtheria or something. Ooh, $2. Thank you. I'm going to mess it up again. Kemazots. Awesome video today, by the way. Or maybe it came out yesterday. I enjoyed it. All right. The widespread attack on technology is even more irresponsible. If technology were to be rolled back to the tribe and to the pre-industrial era, the result would be mass starvation and death on a universal scale. The vast majority of the world's population is dependent for its very survival on modern technology and industry. The North American continent was able to accommodate approximately 1 million Indians in the days before Columbus. I think they found... So this is from the 80s. I feel like they found that that's totally wrong. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's suspected that the Native American population was much, much, much larger than they thought. Miscalculations coming from both kind of trying to turn a blind eye towards the sort of imperialism, colonial takeover of the American continent, but also the diseases got across the continent faster than the people did. So when Columbus or white Europeans or whatever got to a lot of these places, a lot of the population had already died from the diseases that the colonists brought. Okay. The North American continent was able to accommodate approximately 1 million Indians in the days before Columbus, all living on a subsistence level. It is now able to accommodate several hundred million people, all living at an infinitely higher living standard. And the reason is modern technology and industry. So I don't want to die on this hill of this little point here. But there's like a Ben Franklin quote, something like, none of the colonists have tasted savage life and wanted to return. Or something, that they had this serious problem of the colonists would go and kidnap, native people, and the native people were happy to return back to their native people. But when the natives would capture colonists, the colonists didn't want to return to the colonial style of living. There's an awesome Ben Franklin quote about that that I recommend plugging when you get the chance to bring it up to people. All right. It is now able to accommodate several hundred million people, all living at an infinitely higher standard of living, and the reason is modern technology and industry. Abolish the latter, and we abolish the people as well. For all one knows, to our fanatic anti-populists, this solution to the population question may be a good thing, but for the greater majority of us, it would be a draconian final solution indeed. So I tend to agree with this, and I think folks in the anarchist left and stuff, they kind of look at the anarcho-primitivism as like, hey, this is going to cause a lot of starvation. And, how do you even enforce this? How could you get people on board with returning to a hunter-gatherer society? obviously a lot of anarcho-primitivists themselves see that critique as just as ludicrous because they, have very specific, answers to those kinds of problems. But that's another story. All right. The irresponsible attack on technology is another liberal flip-flop. It comes from the same liberal intellectuals who 30-odd years ago were denouncing capitalism for not putting modern technology to full use in the service of state planning. And we're calling for absolute rule by a modern technocratic elite. Yet now the very same intellectuals who not so long ago were yearning for technological dictatorship over all of our lives are now trying to deprive us of the very vital fruits of technology itself. So I'd say there's two arguments. He's acting like it's one and the same. The same liberals who are saying that we need to improve technology to better our lives and capitalism isn't doing it are the same people that are saying we need to get rid of technology altogether because it's causing an ecological collapse. But, I mean, this makes me think of things like, again, post-scarcity anarchism, as well as even, like, the bread book itself, that capitalism does not have the motivation to make technology cause less pollution, because why would they pay to cause less pollution? That's them paying a bunch of money for, it's an externality. Externalities are things costs that you can kick off to other people without it interfering with the money that you're making on the product you're producing. So in The Conquest of Bread, he talks about factory equipment being dangerous or being noisy or just being not nice to work with, and that in an anarcho-communist society you could update that technology to be more ecologically sound and more pleasant for workers to go to work and work with this heavy machinery. And post-scarcity anarchism makes the same argument. So it's not that there was this attack on technology and now look, they're so hypocritical, they've done the reverse and they're calling for more technology, now they're attacking it. They're calling for better technology and they're attacking, smokestacks and nuclear power plants and oil spills and all the mess. There's multiple types of technology. You can't. Okay, I've sat on this point too much. Let's keep going. Yet the various contradictory phases of liberal thought never completely die, and many of these same anti-technologists, in an 180-degree reversal of the automation hysteria, are also confidently forecasting technological stagnation from now on. They cheerily predict a gloomy future for mankind by assuming that technology will stagnate and not continue to improve and accelerate. This is the technique of pseudo-scientific forecasting of a widely touted anti-growth Club of Rome report. As Passell, Roberts, and Ross write in their critique of the report, if the telephone company were restricted to turn of the century technology, 20 million operators would be needed to handle today's volume of calls. Or as British editor Norman McRae has observed, an exploitation of the trends of the 1880s would show today's cities burned under horse manure. Or further, while the team's Club of Rome's model hypothesizes exponential growth of industrial and agricultural needs, it places arbitrary, non-exponential limits on the technological progress that might accommodate these needs. The Reverend Thomas Malthus made a similar point 2 centuries ago without benefit of computer printouts. Malthus argued that people tend to multiply exponentially while the food supply at best increases at a constant rate. He expected that starvation and war would periodically redress the balance. But there is no particular criterion beyond myopia on which to base that speculation. Malthus was wrong. Food capacity has kept up with population. While no one knows for certain, technological progress shows no sight of slowing down. The best econometric estimates suggest that it is indeed growing exponentially. What we need is more economic growth, not less. More and better technology, and not the impossible and absurd attempt to scrap technology and return to the primitive tribe. Improved technology and greater capital investment will lead to higher living standards for all and provide greater material comforts, as well as the leisure and to pursue and enjoy the spiritual side of life. There is precious little culture or civilization available for people who must work long hours to eke out a subsistence living. The real problem is that productive capital investment is being siphoned off by taxes, restrictions, and government contracts on unproductive and wasteful government expenditures, including military and space boondoggling. I feel like this is the common complaint, right? To say of libertarians and ANCAP types. Oh, it's not because there's this inherent class antagonism between capitalist and worker, that the capitalist wants the worker to work as hard as possible for as little pay as possible, and the worker wants the exact opposite, to work as leisurely as possible for the most pay as possible. That's not it. That's not what's causing problems. It's that the state bought a couple of school buses and an aircraft carrier, and if they hadn't have done that, everyone would be millionaires with yachts, apparently. So the argument goes. Cool. Just doing a check on how much further we have. Okay. All right, let's keep it going. Next section, conservation of resources. As we have mentioned, the self-same liberals who claim that we have entered the post-scarcity age and are in no further need of economic growth are in the forefront of the complaint that capitalist greed is destroying our scarce natural resources. The gloom and doom soothsayers of the Club of Rome, for example, by simply extrapolating current trends of resource use, confidently predict the exhaustion of vital raw materials within 40 years. But confident and completely faulty predictions of exhaustion of raw materials have been made countless times in recent centuries. It makes sense to make this complaint in the 80s, maybe. I mean, post-scarcity anarchism was complaining about global warming in the 60s, but maybe in the 80s it made sense to complain that, they've said that the ecology is being ruined before, but look, we went from having coal-powered trains to oil-powered cars. See, technology is getting better. But again, those who watched Philosophy Tube's video, you could see that we're definitely reaching an endpoint. I don't suspect that Elon Musk is going to save us all, right? Oh, we're talking about Coke, right? The joke is that the Soros money, people getting these Soros checks, is totally a non-existent a spook. But the Koch brother money is a real thing. I don't know who all gets it. I don't know. Steven Crowder or whoever else. Those other ding-dongs, they're the ones that get the Koch brother money. That does exist, as opposed to the Soros money, which does not exist. All right, let's keep going. What the soothsayers have overlooked is the vital role that the free market economic mechanism plays in conserving and adding to natural resources. Let us consider, for example, a typical copper mine. Why has copper ore not been exhausted long before now by the inexorable demands of our industrial civilization? Why is it that copper miners, once they have found and opened a vein of ore, do not mine all the copper immediately? Why instead do they conserve the copper mine, add to it, and extract the copper gradually from year to year? Because the mine owners realize that, for example, if they tripled this year's production of copper, they may indeed triple this year's income. But they will also be depleting the mine, and therefore the future income they will be able to derive from it. On the market, this loss of future income is immediately reflected in the monetary value, the price of the mine as a whole. This monetary value reflects in the selling price of the mine, and then of individual shares of mining stock. Is based on the expected future income to be earned from the production of the copper. Any depletion of the mine then will lower the value of the mine and hence the price of the mining stock. Every mine owner then has to weigh the advantages of immediate income of copper production against the loss of capital value of the mine as a whole, and hence against the loss in the value of his shares. So this whole meme here is that, property rights is what protects the environment. If I own the mine, I don't want to completely destroy the environment. I want to be able to use this mine for generations, or I don't want to totally deforest this area. I would like to keep foresting this area for generations. And yet we see, like, for the foresting example, they claim to be planting, as much trees as they're cutting down or something, or plant 2 trees for every one they cut down. But they plant the trees that are monoculture and grow like the fastest on the least nutrients. So they take like a very diverse forest that animals can use, and they replace it with like a farming situation where they can farm lumber, right? And we know, like, we got mountaintop removal and stuff like that. This doesn't exactly seem like ecologically sound business practice according to this book, but we know that his interpretation of the economy seems to be BS. The other thing about the owner of the mine won't want to mine all the copper because he wants to save some for later. That's why they have false scarcity. Like they mine a whole bunch of diamonds or copper or whatever, and then they keep it off the market and keep the price high. That's the loophole. So there is no fundamental law of capitalism that protects the environment. There's definitely ways around that, as we are now living with. All right, let's keep going. The mine owners' decisions are determined by their expectations of future copper yields and demands of existing and expected rates of interests, etc. Suppose, for example, that copper is expected to be rendered obsolete in a few years by a new synthetic metal. In that case, copper mine owners will rush to produce more copper now when it is more highly valued, and save less for the future when it will have little value, thereby benefiting the consumers and the economy as a whole by producing copper now when it is more intensely needed. But on the other hand, if a copper shortage is expected in the future, mine owners will produce less now and wait to produce more later when copper prices are higher, thereby benefiting society by producing more in the future, when it will be needed more intensely. Thus, we see that the market economy contains a marvelous built-in mechanism whereby the decisions of resource owners on present as against future production will benefit not only their own income and wealth, but the mass of consumers and economy as a whole. For this first example, with if we're going to invent some sort of synthetic substitute for copper, why not mine it all now? I mean, we basically see this with oil, right? The U.S. military is spending gargantuan amounts of money to protect and to take over oil in the Middle East and stuff, as oil is becoming, something that we should most definitely do without if we want to avoid ecocide. And even, now countries are, as Antarctica is melting, they're trying to, or maybe it's the Arctic Circle. As the Arctic Circle is melting, they're trying to lay claim to little parts of it because they'll be able to drill for oil now that the ice is gone. All right. But there is much more to this free market mechanism. Suppose that a growing shortage of copper is now expected in the future. The result is that more copper will be withheld now and saved for future production. The price of copper will rise. The increase in copper prices will have several conserving effects. In the first place, the higher price of copper is a signal that the users of copper that it is scarcer and more expensive. The copper users will then conserve the use of this more expensive metal. They will use less copper, substituting cheap They will use less copper, substituting cheaper metals or plastics, and copper will be conserved more fully and saved for those who use of which there is no satisfactory substitute. Moreover, the greatest cost of copper will stimulate A, a rush to find new copper ores, and B, a search for less expensive substitutes, perhaps by new technological discoveries. Higher prices for copper will also stimulate campaigns for saving and recycling the metal. This price mechanism of the free market is precisely the reason that copper and other natural resources have not disappeared long ago. Cool. Predictions of imminent exhaustion of resources, as we have noted, is nothing new. In 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt, calling for a governors' conference on natural resources, warned of their imminent exhaustion. At the same conference, steel industrialist Andrew Carnegie predicted the exhaustion of the Lake Superior Iron Range by 1940, while railroad magnate James J. Hill forecast the exhaustion of much of our timber resources in 10 years. Not only that, Hill even predicted an imminent shortage of wheat production in the United States, in a country where we are still grappling with the wheat surplus generated by our farm subsidy program. Current forecasts of doom are made on the same basis. Grievous overweighting of the prospects of modern technology and an ignorance of the workings of the market economy. I think that I've seen this on Dapperton, the ANCAP Dapperton's channel, and I suspect I've seen other ANCAPs make the same argument that, oh, they always claim, Malthus was wrong and all these predictions of doom and gloom were wrong. They said global warming would destroy the planet here, and that didn't happen here, and that didn't happen here, and that didn't happen. But I don't see that as being the case. Like, yeah, way back when you could look at someone like Malthus and, they made wrong predictions about how much food production would go up. But it seems to me that when I look at what the climate scientists and stuff are saying, they were saying the world is going to end in 200 years if we don't stop this. The world is going to end in 150 years. The world is going to end in 80 years. And then the ANCAPs look at each one of those. They keep saying it's going to end and it didn't. I don't know. Okay. Cool. It is true that several particular natural resources have suffered in the past and now from depletion, but in each case the reason has not been capitalist greed. On the contrary, the reason has been the failure of government to allow private property in the resource. In short, a failure to pursue the logic of private property rights far enough. One example has been timber resources. In the American West and in Canada, most of the forests are owned not by private owners, but by the federal or provincial government. The government then leases their use of private timber to private timber companies. In short, private property is permitted only in the annual use of the resource, but not in the forests, the resource itself. In this situation, the private timber company does not own the capital value, and therefore does not have to worry about depletion of the resource itself. The timber company has no economic incentive to conserve the resource, replant trees, etc. Its only incentive is to cut as many trees as quickly as possible, since there is no economic value in the timber company in maintaining the capital value of the forest. This is kind of like a tragedy of the commons argument who maybe someone in the chat knows. Someone came out with a great, maybe it was Thought Slime or maybe it was Mexi. Someone did a terrific video on why the tragedy of the commons argument is BS. But basically the argument goes, if there's this plot of land that's communally owned and people can send their cows to graze on it, then everyone will try and graze as much as possible, because if you don't own the land, you have no reason to protect it. But and then the land would be depleted and ruined, the tragedy of the commons. But if you divided up the land into private holdings and then everyone was a private owner, then they wouldn't ruin their own backyard. So therefore, private ownership is awesome. Mexi, I'm seeing Mexi in chat. Yeah, Mexi did a great video on Tragedy of the Commons. So maybe I'm going to make a note of that. Mexi video on Tragedy of the Commons. Perfect. Maybe when I'm reviewing the book, right, then I can jump to a clip of that. In Europe, where private ownership of the forest is far more common, there is little complaint of destruction of timber resources. That's because they get a lot of their timber from India. For whatever private property is allowed in the forest itself, it is to the benefit of the owner to preserve and restore tree growth while he is cutting timber, so to avoid depletion of the forest's capital value. Thus, in the United States, a major culprit has been the Forest Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which owns forests and leases annual rights to cut timber, with resulting devastation of trees. In contrast, private forests, such as those owned by the large lumber firms in Georgia Pacific and U.S. Plywood, scientifically cut and forest their trees in order to maintain their future supply. I want to say it was the head guy of Georgia Pacific, but folks in the chat, if maybe you're familiar with Judy Berry. Judy Berry was a member of the group Earth First, and the FBI attempted to assassinate her with a car bomb. And when she didn't die from the car bomb, they turned around and arrested her for the car bomb. Apparently, you know, she was smart enough to make this complex motion-triggered bomb. What it was is inside the bomb there was a ball bearing, and when the ball bearing rolled and hit a connector, the bomb would go off. So smart enough to make this motion-triggered bomb, and then dumb enough to drive around with a motion-triggered bomb in the car, apparently. Then arrested for her own assassination attempt. And I think like only a few years ago, long after she died of, I think, breast cancer or something, the FBI awarded the estate of Judy Berry like $4 million. Like, oh yeah, whoops, like a long time ago we totally like put a car bomb in your car and tried to kill you. Anyway, I think Judy Berry had said that one of the guys from Georgia Pacific, I'm getting on a tangent, but basically he'd said, when I see trees, I see dollar bills, you know, and when I cut to infinity. So that's your capitalist conservation of resources there for you, is assassinating environmentalists and cutting to infinity. All right, let's keep going. Another unhappy consequence of the American government's failure to allow private property in the resource was the destruction of the Western grasslands in the late 19th century. Every viewer of Western movies is familiar with the mystique of the open range and the often violent wars among cattlemen, sheepmen, and farmers over parcels of ranch land. The open range was the failure of the federal government to apply the policy of homesteading to the changed conditions of the drier climate of the western Mississippi. In the East, the 160 acres granted free to homesteading farmers on government land constituted a viable technological unit for farming in a wetter climate. But in the dry climate of the West, no successful cattle or sheep ranch could be organized on a mere 160 acres, but the federal government refused to expand the 160-acre unit to allow for homesteading of larger cattle ranches. Hence the open range on which private cattle and sheep owners were able to roam unchecked on government-owned pastoral land. But this meant that no one could own the pasture, the land itself. It was therefore an economic advantage for every cattle or sheep owner, okay, here we go again, to graze the land and use up the grass as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the grass would be grazed by some other sheep or cattle owner. The result of this tragically short-sighted refusal to allow private property on grasslands itself was an overgrazing of the land, the ruining of the grasslands by grazing too early in the season, and the failure of anyone to restore and replant the grass. More Tragedy of the Commons BS that we got there. All right, we're almost to the pollution section. So once we get to the pollution section, that's where things are going to get interesting, and then we're gonna call it. With respect to the ocean, we are still in a primitive, unproductive hunter-gatherer stage. Anyone can capture fish in the ocean or extract its resources, but only on the run, only as hunter-gatherers. No one can farm the ocean. No one can engage in aquaculture. It is in this way we are deprived of the use of immense fish and mineral resources of the sea. Aren't we like overfishing the sea? Like there's going to be no fish? For example, if anyone tried to farm the sea and to increase the productivity of fisheries by fertilizers, he would immediately be deprived of the fruits of his effort because he could not keep other fishermen from rushing in and seizing the fish. And so no one tries to fertilize the oceans and as the land is fertilized. Furthermore, there is no economic incentive. In fact, there is every disincentive for anyone to engage in technological research in the ways and means of improving the productivity of fisheries or in extracting the mineral resources of the ocean. BP oil spill, right? We're going to end up with more of that if we want a privatized ocean system. There will only be such incentives when property rights in parts of the ocean are fully allowed as property rights on land. Even now, there is a simple but effective technique that could be used for increasing fish productivity. Parts of the ocean could be fenced off electronically. Okay. Parts of the ocean could be fenced off electronically. And through this readily available electronic fencing, fish could be segregated by size. By preventing big fish from eating smaller ones, the production of fish could be increased enormously. And if private property in parts of the ocean were permitted, a vast flowering of aquaculture would create and multiply ocean resources in numerous ways we can't even foresee. Okay. Yeah, that's what we need. That's the problem. I mean, this is in a way, this is like, okay, if you look over the patchwork of farmlands, is that technically more productive than like what it was before farmlands in the capitalist sense? Yes. Is it also like somewhat of an ecological disaster? You know, industrial agriculture? Also, yes. It's totally bad for the soil to have acres and acres of corn and then acres and acres of potatoes and then acres and acres of apple orchards and all this like monoculture that depletes only one resource or like only one set of nutrients from the soil, as opposed to the biodiversity that nature provides. So, you know, let's take that disaster and turn around and apply it also to the ocean. We can divide up the ocean into squares of electronically fenced off areas, somehow segregate fish and keep them from eating each other, and then the ocean will be way more profitable. I said this last stream, but do you folks remember the videos? This was during like Obama's the public option for healthcare debate, and someone had came out with these videos: privatize the fire department, privatize the police department, things like that. Those were hilarious. I will probably use clips from those in the review of this book. You're like, no one's making any money off this system, and that means it's broken. That's what this reminds me of. All right, sounds like an ecological disaster to me. Electronically fence off the ocean and segregate the fish to make it more profitable. Let's see here. Charlie Fairchild, thank you very much for the super chat. About half of all oceans pollution is industrial fishing nets, because it's easier for the companies to leave the nets there. No way to trace them back to the company. Love your videos. Rad. Thank you. I love your comments because that is absolutely correct. I believe Peter Cawthon did the video on the plastic straws and talking about how, 99 point whatever % of the plastic in the ocean is caused by fishing. Tie that back again to Philosophy Tube's video about global warming and the ways in which fishing companies are abusing migrant labor and stuff, right? What a disaster. I don't even eat fish. All right. National governments have tried vainly to cope with the problem of fish depletion by placing irrational and uneconomic restrictions on the total size of the catch or on the length of the allowable season. In the case of salmon, tuna, and halibut, technological methods of fishing have thereby been kept primitive and unproductive by unduly shortening the season and injuring the quality of the catch by stimulating overproduction and underuse during the year of the fishing fleets. And of course, such government restrictions are nothing at all to stimulate the growth of aquaculture. Okay. The growing international conflicts over parts of the ocean only further highlight the importance of private property rights in this vital area. For as the United States and other nations assert their sovereignty 200 miles from their shores, and as private companies and governments squabble over areas of the ocean, and as trawlers, fishing nets, oil drillers, and mineral diggers war over the same areas of the ocean, property rights become increasingly and patently more important. This growing conflict leads Christie to predict that the seas are in a stage of transition. They are moving from a condition of which property rights are almost non-existent to a condition in which property rights of some form will become appropriated or made available. Eventually, concludes Christie, as the sea's resources become more valuable, executive rights will be acquired. Cool. Maybe. I mean, there is talk of having the North Atlantic Passage opened up with global warming, new areas for digging up oil, now that global warming has done so much good things. All right, pollution. This is the last section here. Pollution. Let's learn all about the ANCAP solution to pollution. All right. Even if we concede that full private property in resources in the free market will conserve and create resources and do it far better than government regulation, what of the problem of pollution? Wouldn't we suffer aggravated pollution from unchecked capitalist greed? It's a very good question, Rothbard. Let's see what you think about it. There is, first of all, this stark empirical fact. Government ownership, even socialism, has proved to be no solution to the problem of pollution. Even the most starry-eyed proponents of government planning concede that the poisoning of Lake Baikal in the Soviet Union is a monument to heedless industrial pollution of a valuable natural resource. But there is far more to the problem than that. Note, for example, the two crucial areas in which pollution has become an important problem: the air and the waterways, particularly the rivers. But these are precisely two of the vital areas in society in which private property has not been permitted to function. First, the rivers. The rivers and the oceans, too, are generally owned by the government. Private property, certainly complete private property, has not been permitted in the water. In essence, when the government owns the rivers, but government ownership is not true ownership because government officials are able to control the resource, cannot themselves reap the capital value on the market. Government officials cannot sell the river or sell stock in them. Hence, they have no economic incentive to preserve the purity and value of rivers. I mean, we have like a Clean Air Act and stuff. There's certainly like democratic pressure. Maybe like a king wouldn't have value, or maybe if you were exploiting the resources of another country, you wouldn't have an incentive to maintain it. But he always acts like there is no motivation in government to do the things that capitalists are motivated to do, and yet completely ignores that, in a democratic system, your proportional say in commanding this or that change is much better than in a capitalist system where you vote with your non-existent dollars. So, okay. Rivers are then, in an economic sense, unowned. Therefore, government officials have permitted their corruption and pollution. Anyone has been able to dump polluting garbage and waste into the waters. But consider what would happen if private firms were able to own the rivers and the lakes. If a private firm owned Lake Erie, for example, then anyone dumping garbage in the lake would be promptly sued in the courts for their aggression against private property, and would be forced by the courts to pay damages and to cease and desist from any further aggression. Thus, only private property rights will ensure an end to pollution, invasion of resources. Only because the rivers are unowned is there no owner to rise up and defend is there no ownership to rise and defend his precious resource from attack. If, in contrast, anyone should dump garbage or pollutants into a lake which is privately owned, as many small lakes are, he would not be permitted to do so for very long. The owner would come roaring to its defense. So, let's note here, capitalists tacitly protecting some aspect of a property that makes them money, trees, grazing land, etc., is no guarantee to protecting pollution in general. Right? There's externalities involved. Only if you can afford. We're aware that pollution is racist, right? Really smelly factories and stuff exist only in the most lowest income areas. That's intentional. Again, in the Philosophy Tube video, I watched it again this morning, so I've seen it a couple times now, so that's why it's on my mind so much. In the Philosophy Tube video, when he talks about the pipeline, right? The pipeline was going to go through a wealthy area, turns around and goes through an Indian reservation instead. They deemed at the end of the day that would be much easier to fight. So I do not see this natural protection of private property rights playing out in any real fashion. Okay. If the government as owner is allowed to pollute the rivers, government has also been the single major active polluter, especially in its role as municipal sewage disposer. There already exist low-cost chemical toilets which can burn off sewage without polluting air, ground, or water. But who will invest in chemical toilets when local governments will dispose of sewage for free for their customers? This example points up a problem similar to the case of the stunting of aquaculture technology by the absence of private property. If governments as owners of rivers permit pollution of water, then industrial technology will and has become a water polluting technology. If production processes are allowed to pollute the rivers unchecked by the owners, then that is the sort of production technology we will have. If the problem of water pollution can be cured by private property rights in water, how about air pollution? Okay, so that's assuming that he said water would be protected. If in capitalism you get what you have through, voting with your dollar and whatever, then they're obviously just going to have the pollution. I don't know to what extent you folks have been to really bad areas of the U.S., but I've been to areas in Texas and stuff where the air just smells flammable. You'd be worried to have a cigarette or light a match or something with how toxic the air is. And my friend who lived there, if you worked for the oil company, you got flats of water I guess you're just screwed if you don't work for the oil company. But if you work for the oil company, you get flats of water that you're supposed to use for brushing your teeth and making your coffee and whatever else. So, I mean, that's like a capitalist system. They're owning where the oil is being drilled, and then they're totally externality polluting and destroying the waterways. But what are you gonna do? That's capitalism for you, I guess. Now we're gonna find out about air pollution. Surely there can't be private property in the air, but the answer is yes, there can. Ooh, yes, there can be private property in the air. Let's find out. We have already seen how radio and TV frequencies can be privately owned. So could channels for airlines. Commercial airline routes, for example, could be privately owned. There is no need for a civil aeronautics board to parcel out and restrict routes between various cities. But in the case of air pollution, we are dealing not so much with private property in the air, but with protecting private property in one's own lungs, fields, and orchards. The vital fact about air pollution is that pollution sends unwanted, unbidden pollutants from smoke to nuclear radiation to sulfur oxides through the air and into the lungs of innocent victims, as well as into their material property. All such emissions which injure persons or property constitute aggression against private property of the victim. Cool. So, I agree with this to a great extent. Essentially, this is my argument for capitalism violating NAP. Right? For those of you who have seen my Capitalism Violates the NAP video, that, you know, if you're allowing one person to own land and have access to dumping in the river, if you're allowing them to own a forest and are allowed to cut down the trees, or they're allowed to do mountaintop removal, these things emit a lot of aggression to the surrounding area, to the surrounding people. Air pollution, after all, is just as much aggression as committing arson against another person's property or injuring him physically. Air pollution that injures others is aggression pure and simple. The major function of government and courts and police is to stop aggression. Instead, the government has failed in this task and has failed grievously to exercise its defense function against air pollution. It is important to realize that this failure has not been a question purely of ignorance, a simple time lag between recognizing a new technological problem and facing up to it. For if some of the modern pollutants had only recently become known, factory smoke and many of its bad effects have been known ever since the Industrial Revolution. Known to the extent that the American courts during the late and as far back as the early 19th century made a deliberate decision to allow property rights to be violated by industrial smoke. Well, that's pretty interesting. To do so, the courts had to and did systematically change and weaken the defense of property rights embedded by Anglo-Saxon common law. Before the mid-late 19th century, any injurious air pollution was considered a tort, a nuisance against the victim who could sue for damages, and against which he could take out an injunction to cease and desist from any further invasion of his property rights. But during the 19th century, the courts systematically altered the law of negligence and the law of nuisance to permit any air pollution which was not usually greater than any similar manufacturing firm, one that was not more extensive than the customary practice of fellow polluters. As factories began to arise and emit smoke, blighting the orchards and neighboring farmers, the farmers would take the manufacturers to court asking for damages and injunctions against further invasions of their property. But the judge said, in effect, Sorry, we know that industrial smoke, i.e. air pollution, invades and interferes with your property rights, but there is something more important than mere property rights, and that is the public policy, the common good. And the common good decrees that industry is a good thing. Industrial progress is a good thing, and therefore your mere private property rights must be overridden on behalf of the general welfare. So it seems like he's got this all turned around. And I see the logic of this argument, right? That, okay, so pollution affects people. It's an externality, essentially, right? But in the way that if we had something that was not a capitalist system, then you could make the judgments democratically that you are being infringed on by this or that thing. Under this system, only people who could afford to take a company to court, assuming that you're going to be able to attack an entire company in the court system, which I find that incredibly unlikely, would you be able to do so? That is the principle that has guided the court during the Air Age, as well may be seen by the decisions in the Ohio courts of Antonic versus Chamberlain, 1947. The residents of a suburban area near Akron issued an enjoin the defendants from operating a privately owned airport. The grounds were invasion of property rights through excessive noise. To cap the crimes of the judgments, legislators, federal and state, moved in to cement the aggression by prohibiting victims of air pollution from engaging in class action suits against polluters. Obviously, if the factory pollutes the atmosphere of a city where there are tens of thousands of victims, it is impractical for each victim to sue to collect his particular damages from the polluter, although an injunction would be used effectively by one small victim. The common law therefore recognizes the validity of class action suits in which one or a few victims can sue the aggressor not only on their own behalf, but on behalf of the entire class of similar victims. But the legislature systematically outlawed such class action suits in pollution cases. For this reason, a victim may successfully sue a polluter who injures him individually in a one-to-one private nuisance suit, but he is prohibited by law from acting against a mass polluter who has injured a large number of people in a given area. All right, so this plays back to the ability to challenge a large company. If you folks remember a few years ago, Walmart was being sued for its sexist promotion policies. And there was a class action lawsuit taken against Walmart as a whole. And the court basically found that, you can't charge all of Walmart as a whole because it's franchised or for whatever reason. You can't charge Walmart as a whole. You have to take your individual suits to each individual Walmart, which is ridiculous because this giant group of women from whatever all over the country aren't going to travel all over the country to the individual state courts to challenge each individual Walmart. And yet each individual Walmart has the purse strings of the entire Walmart corporation that they could use to bring to bear in that court case. The same kind of thing is happening here. I don't see it as viable that in a capitalist system a person would be able to challenge like a giant industrial polluter in the way that like a democratic system would be able to. If you folks saw Thought Slime's video today critiquing, let's get all YouTubey here. If you saw Thought Slime's video today critiquing Destiny's debate with non-compete, Destiny's arguing that, hey, if there's 30% of the workforce is black and 70% of the workforce is white, won't they democratically infringe on the rights of that 30%? To which Thought Slime rightly concludes, yeah, but I mean, in our current system of capitalists, you essentially have this dictatorial individual person who's making these claims. I see no difference here, where you can argue, yeah, well, if we had a purely anarcho-capitalist system, people could take polluters to court, but the chances of them individually challenging the court is very minuscule compared to like a democratic system like participatory economics or anarcho, communism or something, where you can collectively or with your vote challenge a polluter. All right. Noise, too, is a form of air pollution. We're wrapping it up here, folks, so if I appreciate you sticking with me for so long. Noise, too, is a form of air pollution. Noise is the creation of sound waves which go through the air and then bombard and invade property and persons of others. Only recently has physicians began to investigate the damaging effects of noise on the human psychology. Again, a libertarian's legal system would permit damage and class action suits against injunctions against excessive and damaging noise pollution. The remedy against air pollution is therefore crystal clear and has nothing to do with the multi-billion-dollar palliative government programs at the expense of the taxpayers, which do not even meet the real issue. The remedy is simply for the courts to return to their function of defending persons and property rights against invasion, and therefore to enjoin anyone from injecting pollutants into the air. But what of the pro-pollution defenders of industrial progress? And what of the increased costs that would be borne by the consumer? And what of the present polluting technology? What of the present polluting technology? Let's find out. The argument that such an injunctive prohibition against pollution would add to the cost of industrial production is as reprehensible as the pre-Civil War argument that the abolition of slavery would add to the cost of growing cotton, and that therefore abolition, however morally correct, was impractical. Okay, I agree with that, basically. So the argument that, we have to stop or challenge this pollution now, even though we rely on it so heavily, is similar to saying, like, oh, we can't get rid of chattel slavery, we rely on it too much. For this means that the polluters are able to impasse all of the high costs of pollution upon those whose lungs and property they have been allowed to invade with impunity. Furthermore, the cost and technology argument overlooks the vital fact that if air pollution is allowed to proceed with impunity, there continues to be no economic incentive to develop technology that will not pollute. I agree with that as well. On the contrary, the incentive would continue to cut as it has for centuries, precisely in another way. Suppose, for example, that in the days when automobiles and trucks were first being issued, the courts had ruled as follows. Ordinarily, we would be opposed to trucks invading people's lawns as an invasion of private property and would insist on trucks confining themselves to the roads, regardless of traffic. But trucks are vitally important to public welfare, and therefore we decree that trucks should be allowed to cross any lawns they wish, provided they believe that this will ease their traffic problem. If the courts had ruled in this way, then we would now have a transportation system in which lawns would be systematically desecrated by trucks, and any attempt to stop this would be decried in the name of modern transportation needs. The point is that this is precisely the way in which the courts ruled on air pollution. Pollution which is far more damaging to all of us than trampling on lawns. In this way, the government gave the green light from the very start to a polluting technology. It is no wonder that this is precisely the kind of technology we have. The only remedy is to force the polluting invaders to stop their invasion and thereby to redirect technology into non-polluting or even air-polluting channels, anti-polluting channels. Already, even at our necessarily primitive stage in anti-polluting technology, techniques have been developed to combat air and noise pollution. Mufflers can be installed on noisy machines that emit sound waves precisely contracyclical to the waves of the machine, and thereby can cancel out these racketing sounds. Air waste, even now, can be recaptured as they leave the chimneys and recycled to yield products useful to industry. Thus, sulfur dioxide, a major noxious air pollutant, can be captured and recycled to produce economically valuable sulfuric acid. The highly polluting spark ignition engine will either have to be cured with new devices or replaced altogether by such non-polluting engines as diesel, gas turbine, or steam, or by an electric car. And as a libertarian system systems engineer Robert Pohl Jr. points out, the cost of installing the non- or anti-polluting technology would then ultimately be borne by the consumers of the firm's products, i.e. by those who choose to associate with the firms, rather than by being passed on to innocent third parties in the form of pollution or taxes. Robert Pohl cogently defines pollution as the transfer of harmful matter or energy to the person or property of another without the latter's consent. The libertarian and the only complete solution to the problem of air pollution is to use the courts and the legal structure to combat and prevent such invasion. There are recent signs that the legal system is beginning to change in this direction. New judicial decisions and repeal of laws disallowing class action lawsuits. But this is only the beginning. Okay, so electric car is an individualist solution. Good for business, though. Good for business to sell every, individual who would like to have a car, an energy efficient car. Social problems need social solutions. Perhaps a sustainable mass transit system. Oh, wait. A mass transit system generates less profit than an individual solution. I think I discussed this in the review of Capitalist Realism as well, that it's economically more profitable to find individual solutions to social problems, which tend to be an ecological disaster, rather than finding a social solution to the problem, which is more cost effective. Cool. All right, we are wrapping this up. F. Wait, am I good? Are we good? Are we still here? I believe we're still here. All right, let's wrap this up. We just have a little tiny bit more to go. Among conservatives, in contrast to libertarians, there are two ultimately similar responses to the problem of air pollution. One response by Ayn Rand and Robert Moses, among others, is to deny that the problem exists, and to attribute the entire agitation to leftists who want to destroy capitalism and technology on behalf of a tribal form of socialism. Yeah, sounds about right. I mean, that's what I expected going into this. I thought that this would be Rothbard's take on it, basically. But I guess not. Pleasantly surprised. I disagree with how the air and water pollution thing will be solved in a market system, but I get where he's going. Okay. While part of this change may be correct, while part of this charge may be correct, denial of the very existence of the problem is to deny science itself, and to give a vital hostage to the left charge that defenders of capitalism place property rights above human rights. Moreover, a defense of air pollution does not even defend property rights. On the contrary, it puts these conservatives' stamp of approval on those industries who are trampling upon the property rights of the mass of the citizenry. For a second, more sophisticated conservative response is by such free market economists as Milton Friedman and the Friedmanites. The Friedmanites concede the existence of air pollution, but propose to meet it not by defense of property rights, but rather by supposedly utilitarian cost-benefit calculations by government, which will make and enforce a social decision on how much pollution to allow. This decision will then be enforced either by licensing a given amount of pollution. This is like a cap and trade kind of thing. I recommend Story of Stuff. If you folks aren't familiar with Story of Stuff, they do great work on ecology and the environment in our modern age. Story of Stuff right here on YouTube. They have a video on cap and trade and how the cap and trade solution is total BS. The granting of pollution rights by a graded scale of taxes against it, or by the taxpayers paying the firm not to pollute. Not only would these proposals grant an enormous amount of bureaucratic power to the government in the name of safeguarding the free market, they would continue to override property rights in the name of collective decisions enforced by the state. This is far from any genuine free market, and reveals that, as in many other economic areas, it is impossible to really defend the freedoms of the free market without insisting on defending the rights of private property. Friedman's grotesque dictum that those urban inhabitants who don't wish to contract pneumonia should move to the country is starkly reminiscent of Marie Antoinette's famous "let them eat cake," and reveals a lack of sensitivity to human or property rights. I would make that same charge against this text, though, as I've already said, that the chances of an individual challenging a polluting corporation in a court system seems very unlikely. If you don't like it here, leave. Friedman's statement, in fact, is of a piece with the typical conservative. If you don't like it here, leave. A statement that implies that the government rightly owns the entire land area here, and anyone who objects to it must therefore leave. I think that that kind of reminds me of towards the end of Capitalist Realism, Fisher explains that conservatives basically live in DreamWorks. And I don't mean the crappy studio that makes those goofy movies. I mean, apparently the term DreamWorks is like when you're in a dream and you get out of bed and all of a sudden you're at work, or like, you know, you're at school, but then you go to open the door at school and you're back at home or something. Like the way that a dream makes those nonsense things make sense in your brain. Fisher argues that conservatives also, you know, are this way. So, you know, America, love it or leave it. Oh, but also like totally free market economy where people can freely associate, right? Oh, we want small government, get government off our backs. Oh, but also we want like police in front of every public bathroom, like checking your genitals before you go in, right? Like, so conservatives, just inherently contradictory positions. All right, last little bit here. In addition to betraying its presumed function of defending private property, government has contributed to air pollution in a more positive sense. It was not long ago that the Department of Agriculture conducted mass spraying of DDT by helicopter over large areas, overriding the wishes of individual objecting farmers. It still continues to pour tons of pollutions and carcinogens over the South in an expensive and vain attempt to eradicate the fire ant. And the Atomic Energy Commission has poured radioactive waste into the air and into the ground by means of its nuclear power plants and through atomic testing. Municipal power and water plants and the plants of licensed monopoly utility companies mightily pollute the atmosphere. One of the major tasks of the state in this area is therefore to stop its own pollution of the atmosphere. I'd agree with this. Like, what's the biggest polluter is like the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy or something with the test of missiles and rockets and everything else. Thus, when we peel away the confusion of the unsounded philosophy of the modern ecologist, we find an important bedrock case against the existing system. But the case turns out to be not against capitalism, private property, growth, or technology per se. It is a case against the failure of government to allow and to defend the rights of private property against invasion. If property rights were able to be defended fully against private and government invasion alike, we would find there, as in other areas of our economy and society, that private enterprise and modern technology would come to mankind not as a curse, but as its salvation. All right. That's the ANCAP solution to the problem of environmental destruction. Privatize everything. You heard it here first, folks. I'm sure you guessed already, but you heard it here first. So, cool. That is the end of the chapter. That's essentially the end of the stream, but pour in some questions. Pour in some questions here. We'll go for just a few more minutes. So I'm going to have myself a drink of a tasty beverage and have a little bit of a doggy treat, and then we can get to the questions. So post those questions. Okay. How can a sane Kaza Doom asks, how can a sane person come to such a conclusion? I tend to think a lot of times these people have a very rational, they have a very by the books way that people go about doing things. So an example I often think of is that, if given like 10 restaurants to go to, the person can rationally, okay, which one, this one has a burger that's like 10 cents less than this other place, but this place also has, whatever. It's like we're all making these cost benefit analysis economically of every decision we make. And that's not at all how things work. Some people might look and say, okay, well, here's like a Burger King, and then here's like 5 other local restaurants I've never heard of. Oh, like I'm just going to go to the Burger King because I know what they have. That's like what most people might choose. Or maybe some person might decide, I want to go to the local place and not give my money to a capitalist. Someone says, can you pet the dog? I don't have a dog. Christopher Sabo, radical viewer, how much of this do you actually agree with? So I guess I only agree with the fact that a lot of the externalities of capitalism, if you agree with the whole violate the NAP thing, a lot of the things that capitalism does causing externalities, you should be able to challenge as violations of the NAP, right? So the existence of certain types of factories, the existence of like a military industrial complex, the existence of ICE detainment centers, I see that as like a social pollution that's negatively impacting, that should be able to be challenged. And in a truly democratic system, you could challenge those things as like, hey, I live in a social system and I'd like to be able to challenge that democratically. Where in this totally free market system, really only those who could afford to would be able to challenge. So I don't agree with his solution on how you solve the problem. I just agree with his way in which the problem is explained, that air pollution isn't about polluting the air in this kind of abstract sense, but that it's about polluting people, right? Cool. Next question, Dorian Sapiens. Here's my question: do present day ANCAPs care as much about the environment as Rothbard appears to? Great question. I don't know. I know like there's probably some anarcho, mutualists, or maybe like more academic ANCAPs that do care. But I suspect from what I've seen online, no. But also, like, again, back to the DreamWorks thing and the ways in which conservative people have inherently contradictory values. ANCAPs are supposed to be all about, individual, free association, non-aggression, and they'll turn around and complain. They make all the same, like, Steven Crowder anti-SJW talking points. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, aren't you all about free association and individual freedoms to look however you want to look and present however you want to present? Why are you giving me this conservative, the police should be guarding the bathrooms and making sure people have the proper genitalia or whatever? That's the kind of ANCAP stuff I tend to see. Questions. Christopher Sabo, would you compare ANCAPs to eco-fascists? I suspect some of them would make similar pronouncements. So again, to the Philosophy Tube video. In the Philosophy Tube video, the part where Ollie is like holding the newspaper and saying like, oh, it makes sense that like migrants wouldn't treat the country as well as like people whose homeland this is. I think that eco-fascists and maybe some ANCAPs would make the same argument about the inherent protection of the environment that comes with property rights. And if you're like a refugee, if you're a migrant, you might not have that same care for the environment. So they might make the argument in that way, I suspect. Here, a lot of these questions don't have question marks. You folks, come on now. Kamazots. So, what do you think about the Tom Hanks playing as Fred Rogers? I hope that he does a good job. I liked that Mr. Rogers documentary, the Won't You Be My Neighbor or whatever. I thought that was good. Hopefully it will be good. I thought about doing a review of, speaking of Tom Hanks, I thought about doing a review of what's the freaking movie? Oh my gosh, I'm totally spacing. The movie with Tom Hanks, Vietnam, and all that. Someone please put that in the comments. What the freaking movie is I'm thinking with Tom Hanks where he goes and fights in Vietnam and stuff. And I'll tell you all about it. Forrest Gump. Thank you. Forrest Gump. Right. Okay. I'll get to these other questions in just a second. I thought about doing a review of Forrest Gump because that is some reactionary shit. They portray like the Black Panthers as being totally violent. They portray the leader of the Students for a Democratic Society as like this creepy raper that's trying to like grab Jenny when she doesn't want it and stuff. Oh my goodness. It's just, a total disaster, that movie. It's very, they talk about that movie is centrist. No, that movie is hella reactionary if you go back and watch it. It just portrays all like anti-war people as just like a bunch of yahoos. Forrest Gump is awesome and he goes and fights in the war and he's a good guy. Meanwhile, Jenny, she gets AIDS and deserves it because she's a hippie. Like it's like the argument of the movie. Okay, that's my hot take. Hot take there is that Forrest Gump is actually trash. Do you believe free market mutualism is better than ANCAPism? I'm a market abolitionist. I think that if you try and maintain parts of the market, you're just gonna screw yourself over. Have you seen the deforestation of West Virginia? If so, what are your thoughts? Is the deforestation of West Virginia in general, like, have I seen that it's deforested, or is that like a documentary? I'm not sure. Deforestation sucks. Derek Jensen has a book called A Lot Like War, it might be called. It definitely has war in the title. Strangely similar to war, strangely like war, something like that, about how basically the industrial war on our forests is similar to warfare in general. Radical Reviewer, you've exposed before how NAP is contradictory as framed by ANCAPs only in terms of private property rights rather than individual autonomy. Was this also presented in this reading and how? Yeah, I would. So I guess that's my point, right? Is that I agree with his diagnosis of the problem that, okay, if capitalist air pollution is an invasion of your sanctity from aggression, then can't you expand that out? I feel like if I were to talk to an ANCAP person, for example, those of you who have seen, I'm going to unfortunately dead name the person because I don't recall their name, but Eric Taxon, who did the videos against copyright. I'm sorry, Taxon, for dead naming you, but I want to make sure if people want to find the video that they find it. And I'm sorry, but I forget Taxon's name at the moment. But the Taxon's video on against copyright, I feel like I would make that same argument to an ANCAP person, that do you believe that copyright is an infringement on people's, ability to freely make things, and then you can expand that restriction outwards. So I think with Rothbard, his restriction on pollution as being a violation of NAP, if you expand that outwards, it can encompass all of capitalism as a violation of people by not giving I'm getting jumbled in my explanation here, but basically, so Michael Albert explains that in a participatory economy, we would have proportional say we should have, ideally, proportional say to the degree to which we are affected by an impact. And capitalism basically violates the NAP by doing that. Capitalism does not allow us to have a proportional say to the degree that we are affected, whether that's externalities or whether that's just voting with your dollar and not having enough money to properly challenge things. That, if a company is deforesting an area or if a company is polluting something and they're this massive company, I cannot exact proportional say against this infringement on my rights, this violation of the aggression principle, because I don't have enough money or whatever to challenge this company. So if that explains it, that explains it. I think that Rothbard shows that pollution is a violation of the non-aggression principle, and I think that you can expand that to see a lot of other segments of the capitalist economy infringe on people in a very similar, if not the exact same way. And then our ability to challenge that inside a capitalist system is non-existent, or very little existent. Cool. Sourceless Ultimacia with the super chat. Thank you. Any ANCAPs that you've considered coherent? Rothbard is okay. Still bad. The only one that I've read is Rothbard so far. Sorry if I'm missing these questions. I'm trying to scroll through the chat here. My coworker says you just gained a subscriber for your take on Forrest Gump. Awesome. Yes. No, Forrest Gump is bad, unfortunately. I will probably do a video of it eventually. I've got a lot of stuff in the works, but I will probably come out with a Forrest Gump is reactionary horseshit, actually, if you look at it. Patricia Taxon. Please do not dead name Taxon. Patricia Taxon has an excellent video on copyright that I think can easily be expounded to incorporate other areas of the economy. So if you're challenging an ANCAP person and you've seen Patricia Taxon's video on copyright, and the way that, so to just explain the video in brief for those who aren't watching it at this moment or haven't seen it yet, go see it. Basically, similar to the way that Kropotkin argues that all inventions are reliant on past inventions, right? Bezos, what did Bezos do? He didn't invent the internet. The internet was invented at public expense. He didn't invent selling stuff online. Anything that is invented is based on, past inventions that led up to it. And so in Patricia Taxon's video, all art is derivative, right? All art is derivative. So you can't exactly have a copyright. That doesn't make sense. And if you were to ask an ANCAP that, isn't all art derivative? Doesn't it make sense that you could make a movie and copy it? What's the purpose of copyright? And if they concede that, then you can say, okay, that makes sense for a song, that you can remix a song and now that's your version and you can sell it. Doesn't that make sense for if you invent your own version of a car or whatever? Doesn't this justly apply to all aspects of the economy? Cool. Isn't your friend, former roommate, an ANCAP? Yeah, he's a libertarian. Yeah, the friend that I'd interviewed in that very poorly done, unfortunately, live stream where I was very echoey. I apologize for that. But that was a mess. Cool. What do you think makes these ANCAPs and fascists, not saying that they're the same ideologies, attractive to people? I think that I've discussed this with people in the past, that there's two kinds of people in the world, as the saying goes. One kind looks at people who have problems and looks at their own life and thinks, well, sheesh, I overcame this, and this. What's these other people's problems, being homeless and being jobless and stuff? I was jobless and I got my shit together. What's these people's problem? And another person can look at what's going on in the world and look at their own life and say, oh, I've had times where I was couch surfing and homeless and working 2 jobs. That was very annoying. I can't imagine what it would have been like to have that and other problems, to have that and the additional problems of going to a terrible school district or facing racial oppression in the job market or whatever, right? So I think that the sort of if you look at Destiny's debate with Sargon on to what extent a person growing up in an impoverished community and going to a bad school, to what extent is that their fault that they didn't overcome that? If you look at Sargon and Destiny's debate on that, I think you see basically the rationale, the intrigue of being a fascist, a libertarian type person, to throw your hands up and like, that's not my problem that you didn't overcome. I think that that's what it's all about. Cool. I think we're good. I think that's it. I think I'm going to wrap it up. So that's For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, the ANCAP bread book, as it were. That's their take on pollution, essentially correctly critiquing air pollution, but having a horrible capitalist solution that would not work to it, and saying that we should privatize the ocean and fence it off electronically to make it more profitable. That's the ANCAP take on the environment for you. A disaster. What do you expect? Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.